There's a suspicious teenager in first class who doesn't belong here. He's making me uncomfortable. Yes, I need police to meet this flight immediately. The woman's voice was sharp, entitled, dripping with accusation. Her perfectly manicured finger pointed across the first-class cabin at a 16-year-old boy who sat quietly in seat 2A, medical textbook open on his lap, headphones covering his ears, completely unaware that his world was about to explode. Flight attendants rushed down the aisle. Passengers turned to stare. And the boy, Marcus Williams, finally looked up, confusion and fear flickering across his young face as he saw everyone watching him. This is Marcus Williams. And in exactly 5 minutes, the woman who called the cops on him would discover something that would haunt her forever. Something that would cost her everything. But to understand how we got here, how a simple flight turned into a nightmare that would change multiple lives, we need to go back 3 hours. 3 hours earlier, to a moment when Marcus Williams had no idea he was about to experience both the best and worst day of his young life. Baltimore-Washington International Airport, Terminal B, 3 hours before the 911 call. Marcus stood in the economy check-in line, his worn backpack slung over one shoulder, earbuds dangling from his neck. The backpack had seen better days, frayed at the edges, patched with duct tape on one corner. But it carried everything Marcus needed. His acceptance letter to Johns Hopkins University, his scholarship paperwork, and a medical textbook he'd bought used for $12. Pages dog-eared from constant reading. At 16 years old, Marcus Williams had the kind of face that still held on to childhood softness, but his eyes carried something heavier. The weight of loss, the burden of responsibility, the quiet determination of someone who'd had to grow up far too fast. He lived with his grandmother in a small row house in East Baltimore. No parents. His father had never been in the picture, and his mother, his beautiful, kind mother, had died of a heart condition when Marcus was just 8 years old. A condition that might have been treatable if they'd had access to better health care, if there had been more specialists in their area, if those ifs had shaped Marcus's entire life. Straight A student, perfect attendance, volunteer at the community health clinic every weekend. And now, a full scholarship to Johns Hopkins University's pre-med program. Marcus Williams was going to become a pediatric cardiologist. He was going to make sure no other 8-year-old had to lose their mother the way he did. But right now, Marcus was just a teenager, trying to board his first flight ever, clutching his economy ticket, trying to calm the nervous flutter in his stomach. Then something unexpected happened. The gate agent, a kind-faced woman named Claire Rodriguez, looked up from her computer screen and smiled. Not the professional, automatic smile airline workers give everyone. A real smile, warm and genuine. "Mr. Williams?" she said, and Marcus stepped forward, confused about why she'd singled him out. "Yes, ma'am. You've been upgraded to first class." Marcus blinked. Once? Twice? The words didn't make sense. There must be a mistake. I didn't request an upgrade. I can't afford." Claire's smile widened. "No mistake, sweetheart. You're in seat 2A, first class. Enjoy your flight." She handed him a new boarding pass, and Marcus stared at it like it might disappear if he looked away. He checked it once, twice, 3 times. Seat 2A, first class. His hands trembled slightly as he took his backpack and moved toward the boarding area. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A voice message from his grandmother, Dorothy Williams. He pressed play, holding the phone to his ear. "Baby, you deserve every good thing coming your way. Your mama would be so proud of the man you're becoming. I love you, Marcus. Fly safe." Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. He quickly wiped them away. His grandmother had raised him alone on a retired cafeteria worker's pension, never complaining, always sacrificing. She'd worked double shifts at the school where she served lunch just to make sure Marcus had everything he needed. Books, school supplies, application fees, and now, somehow, he was flying first class. 20 minutes later, Marcus walked down the jet bridge, his heart pounding. He'd never been on a plane before. Never been out of Maryland, actually. This flight to a conference for incoming Johns Hopkins students was his first real adventure. The flight attendant at the door, a woman with a warm smile and a name tag that read, Jessica Chen, greeted him. "Welcome aboard. First class is right through here." Marcus nodded. suddenly self-conscious about his faded jeans and his $30 sneakers, the ones he'd bought at a discount store. The ones that were comfortable, but definitely not expensive. He found seat 2A, the window seat, and carefully placed his backpack under the seat in front of him. The seat was massive compared to what he'd expected. Leather, wide, so much legroom. Marcus settled in, pulled out his medical textbook, Grey's Anatomy, the real one, not the TV show, and his notebook filled with his own detailed anatomical drawings. Drawing helped him memorize every muscle, every bone, every vessel. He put his headphones on, trying to make himself small, invisible. Just a kid studying. Nothing to see here. But then they boarded. Karen and Richard Matthews. Late 40s. Karen wore designer clothes that probably cost more than Marcus's grandmother made in a month. Her jewelry caught the light, diamonds, real ones, glittering at her ears and throat and wrists. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She carried an expensive purse, the kind with designer logos plastered all over it. She was assigned to seat 2B, the middle seat, right next to Marcus. And the exact moment, Karen Matthews saw Marcus sitting in seat 2A, everything changed. She stopped dead in the aisle, just froze, stared at him like he'd personally offended her by existing in that space. Her husband, Richard, nearly bumped into her from behind. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice tired, like he'd asked this question many times before. Karen leaned close to him, but her whisper wasn't quiet at all. Everyone nearby could hear her perfectly. "I paid $1,200 for these seats. Why is he here?" The emphasis on he was sharp as a blade. Cutting. Deliberate. Marcus heard it. Even through his headphones, even though he was pretending to be absorbed in his textbook, he heard every word. His hands tightened on the book, knuckles going pale. But he didn't look up, didn't acknowledge her. He'd learned a long time ago that sometimes the safest thing to do was make yourself invisible. Karen maneuvered into seat 2B, making a show of adjusting her belongings, her body language screaming discomfort. She pulled out her phone and started texting furiously, her thumbs flying across the screen. But she wasn't done. Jessica, the flight attendant, came by to check on passengers, and Karen immediately flagged her down. "Excuse me," Karen said, her voice saccharine sweet but with an edge underneath. "Can you verify this passenger's ticket?" She didn't say Marcus's name. Didn't even look at him. Just said, "This passenger," like he was a problem to be solved. Jessica's professional smile didn't waver, but something hardened in her eyes. She'd clearly dealt with this before. "All passengers have been verified, ma'am. Everyone in first class has a valid ticket and boarding pass." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "I see. Thank you." But her tone said she didn't see it all. Her tone said this wasn't over. She sat down heavily, radiating disapproval. And Marcus, poor Marcus, sat there with his medical textbook, his hands now trembling slightly as he gripped the pages tighter, trying to focus on the diagram of the human heart while his own heart raced with humiliation. Around them, the rest of first class filled up. An elderly black man, distinguished-looking with silver hair and kind eyes, settled into seat 1A directly in front of Marcus. His name was Mr. Davis, though Marcus didn't know it yet. Mr. Davis pulled out a newspaper but kept glancing back, his expression thoughtful. Across the aisle, a young couple in their 20s whispered to each other, the woman shooting sympathetic looks toward Marcus. And a few rows back, a businessman in an expensive suit typed on his laptop, occasionally looking up at the scene unfolding in row 2. Mr. Davis caught Marcus's eye through the gap between the seats. And he did something simple, something that meant everything in that moment. He nodded, just a subtle nod, an acknowledgement that said, "I see you. I see what's happening. You're not alone." Marcus's throat tightened, he nodded back, grateful beyond words. The plane's engines hummed to life, the flight attendants went through their safety demonstration, and Karen Matthews pulled out her phone again, taking photos, not of the view, not of her seat, of Marcus. She tried to be discreet, angling her phone like she was texting, but everyone could see exactly what she was doing. Documenting, building her case, preparing for something. Richard, her husband, shifted uncomfortably beside her. "Karen," he said quietly, a warning in his voice. She ignored him. And Marcus sat there, a brilliant 16-year-old kid with a full scholarship to one of the best universities in the country, with dreams of saving lives and honoring his mother's memory, feeling smaller and smaller with each passing moment. He had no idea that in just a few minutes, this woman would call 911. He had no idea that police would be summoned. He had no idea that his first flight, his first taste of something special, was about to turn into a public humiliation he'd never forget. But more than that, Karen Matthews had no idea what she was about to discover. She had no idea who Marcus really was, why he was in that seat, or what her phone call would cost her. Because sometimes the assumptions we make reveal everything about us and nothing about the people we judge. And Karen Matthews was about to learn that lesson in the most devastating way possible. Before we continue, if you're feeling this story, if you want to see how this situation unfolds, and what Karen discovers that changes everything, hit that subscribe button right now and tell me in the comment section from where in the world are you watching this story. Because what happens in the next few minutes will leave you in shock. Now here's my question for you. Have you ever witnessed someone being discriminated against in public? What did you do? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one. The plane began to taxi toward the runway. Marcus stared out the window, watching the ground crew, the other planes, anything to avoid eye contact with the woman beside him. His first flight, what should have been magical, was turning into a nightmare. And it was about to get so much worse. The plane lifted off the runway, and for just a moment, one beautiful, fleeting moment, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Freedom. The ground falling away beneath them, the city getting smaller, the world opening up. This was it. His first flight, the beginning of his future. But Karen Matthews wasn't done with him, not even close. As the plane climbed through the clouds and the seatbelt sign dinged off, Karen shifted in her seat. And then it started. Small things. Tiny things. The kind of things that individually you might dismiss as accidents. But together they formed a pattern of deliberate cruelty. She bumped Marcus's arm, once, then again a few minutes later, and again. Each time she made it look accidental, adjusting her position, reaching for her purse, stretching. But Marcus knew. He pulled his arm closer to his body, trying to take up even less space, his shoulder pressed against the window. The flight attendant, Jessica, came through with the beverage cart, her smile professional and warm. "What can I get you folks to drink?" Karen's voice rang out, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "I'll have the champagne, please." Then, with a pointed look at Marcus, she added, "I'm sure he'll just want water." The emphasis on he again, that same cutting tone. And the assumption, the casual, dismissive assumption, that Marcus didn't deserve anything better than water. Jessica turned to Marcus, her expression carefully neutral. "And for you, sir?" Marcus looked up, his voice quiet but polite. "Actually, I'd like orange juice, please." Karen's lips pursed like she'd tasted something sour. She took her champagne and turned to Richard, her voice a stage whisper that everyone could hear. "Did you see his shoes? Those are $30 sneakers. Something's not right here, Richard. Something is very wrong." She said it like Marcus's shoes were evidence of a crime. Like the price of his sneakers determined his worth as a human being. Like poverty was suspicious. Marcus's face burned with shame. He stared down at his sneakers, the ones he'd been so proud of when his grandmother bought them for him. The ones that were clean and comfortable and perfectly fine. But now, under Karen's scrutiny, they felt like a scarlet letter. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a folder, trying to focus on something, anything, else. Inside were his important documents. His Johns Hopkins acceptance letter. His scholarship paperwork, showing a full ride worth over $200,000. His course selection forms. The businessman sitting across the aisle, who'd been watching this entire exchange with growing discomfort, leaned forward. He was in his 50s, wearing an expensive suit, but his eyes were kind. "Johns Hopkins?" he said, having caught a glimpse of the letterhead. "That's impressive, young man. What's your intended specialty?" And for the first time since boarding, Marcus's face lit up. This was his passion, his purpose, his reason for existing. "Pediatric cardiology," he said, shy but passionate, the words tumbling out faster as he went on. "My mom died of a heart condition when I was 8. There weren't enough specialists in our area who could." "Jessica." Karen's voice cut through the conversation like a knife. "Can you come here, please?" The flight attendant appeared immediately, her professional mask firmly in place, though her eyes showed a flicker of frustration. "Yes, ma'am? How can I help you?" Karen leaned in, dropping her voice to what she probably thought was a whisper, but was actually perfectly audible to everyone nearby. "I smell something suspicious, and his backpack is blocking my legroom." She gestured at Marcus's backpack, which was completely under the seat in front of him, nowhere near her space. "I don't feel safe." Jessica glanced at the backpack, then back at Karen. Her patience was clearly wearing thin. "Ma'am, is there a specific problem I can help you with? A specific safety concern?" Karen straightened up, her voice taking on a righteous tone. "Just keep an eye on him. You never know these days. I'm just trying to protect everyone." "Protect everyone? From what?" From a 16-year-old boy reading a medical textbook from a teenager who said ma'am and please, and whose biggest crime was existing in a space Karen thought he didn't belong? Marcus sat frozen, his orange juice untouched, his textbook forgotten. Each comment was like a paper cut. Small, but they added up. Death by 1,000 assumptions. The businessman across the aisle shook his head in disgust but didn't say anything more. The young couple exchanged uncomfortable glances, and Mr. Davis in seat 1A gripped his newspaper tighter, his jaw clenched. But Karen Matthews was just getting started. About 20 minutes into the flight, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, announcing she needed to use the restroom. She made a big show of squeezing past Marcus, even though there was plenty of room, making sure her designer purse bumped against his head. She walked to the back of the cabin and disappeared into the bathroom, and then through the thin bathroom door, passengers nearby could hear her voice. She was on her phone. Making a call. "Yes, this is Karen Matthews. I'm on flight 2847 to Baltimore. I need to report suspicious activity. There's a teenage boy in first class who doesn't belong here, and I'm concerned for everyone's safety. Please have security meet this flight." She left a voicemail with airport security. Actually called them, because a teenager was studying in first class. When Karen returned to her seat, she pulled out her phone again, and this time she wasn't even trying to be subtle. She held up her phone, angling it directly at Marcus, and started taking photos. Click, click, click. Marcus could see what she was doing through his peripheral vision. Everyone could see. She was documenting him like he was evidence, like he was a criminal. That's when Mr. Davis had enough. The elderly man unbuckled his seatbelt, turned around in his seat, and looked directly at Karen. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of someone who'd seen this movie before. Someone who'd lived through decades of this exact treatment. "Ma'am, that young man is clearly a student. He's been reading a medical textbook for the past hour. Perhaps you could show some kindness instead of harassment." Karen's face flushed red. "Excuse me, mind your own business. I'm protecting everyone on this plane." "From what?" Mr. Davis asked, his voice still calm but with steel underneath. "From education? From ambition? From a child?" Richard, Karen's husband, finally spoke up, his voice tired and uncomfortable. "Karen, maybe you're overreacting. The flight attendant checked his ticket. He's just a kid studying. Can we please just—" Karen whipped around to face her husband, her voice sharp as glass. "Don't you dare take his side, Richard. Don't you dare. I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm seeing." What was she seeing? What could she possibly be seeing that warranted this treatment? Marcus finally pulled off his headphones completely. His hands were shaking, his voice was quiet, almost breaking. "Ma'am, I don't know what I did to upset you, but I promise I'm just trying to get to Baltimore for my grandmother's birthday. I'm not trying to cause any problems." The vulnerability in his voice, the plea for basic human decency, should have melted anyone's heart. Karen barely glanced at him. "Sure you are." 2 words, dripping with disbelief, with contempt. The young woman across the aisle caught Marcus's eye and mouthed, "I'm sorry." Her boyfriend put his arm around her, both of them looking sick with second-hand shame. The plane flew on. The sky outside was beautiful, endless blue, cotton-white clouds. But inside that cabin, the tension was suffocating. And then the seatbelt sign dinged off again. Karen immediately unbuckled, stood up. Her face was set with determination. "That's it," she announced to the cabin, to Richard, to anyone who would listen. "I'm calling the police." Richard's face went pale. "Karen, sit down. You're embarrassing us. You're embarrassing yourself." Karen's voice rose, shrill and self-righteous. I'd rather be embarrassed than dead, Richard. I'd rather be safe than sorry. She marched to the galley area at the front of first class, pulled out her phone, and dialed 911. And this time, everyone could hear her. The entire front section of the plane could hear every single word. Yes, I need police to meet a flight. Flight 2847 to Baltimore. There's a black teenage male in first class acting suspiciously. The 911 operator's voice was tinny but audible, asking questions. No, he hasn't done anything specific, but he doesn't belong here. His clothes, his shoes, everything about him is wrong. I'm a concerned passenger and I'm requesting police meet this aircraft. Yes, I'll stay on the line. Marcus heard everything. Every word, every accusation, every assumption about who he was based solely on the color of his skin and the price of his sneakers. His face showed a journey of emotions in seconds. First, disbelief, then hurt, then humiliation, and finally, resignation. The kind of resignation that comes from realizing this isn't new. This isn't surprising. This is just another Tuesday for a black kid in America. A single tear rolled down his cheek. Just one. He wiped it away quickly, but not before Mr. Davis saw it. The elderly man unbuckled his seatbelt again, stood up, and walked back to Marcus's row. He leaned down, his voice quiet but firm. Son, hold your head high, you've done nothing wrong. Nothing. Do you hear me? Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. Jessica, the flight attendant, approached Karen in the galley, her professionalism cracking just slightly to show genuine concern. Ma'am, I need to inform the captain about this. Calling 911 from an aircraft and making accusations against another passenger is a serious matter. Karen's face lit up with triumph. Good, excellent. Tell the captain we need police waiting at the gate. Tell him there's a threat on board. A threat. She called a 16-year-old honors student a threat. The businessman across the aisle had his phone out now, recording, documenting everything. Because he knew, they all knew, this was wrong. Fundamentally, deeply wrong. Marcus turned to look out the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. Below, the world stretched out in miniature, cities and towns and roads connecting everything together. From up here, everyone looked the same. From up here, you couldn't see the color of anyone's skin, couldn't judge the price of their shoes, couldn't make assumptions about who belonged and who didn't. But down there, on the ground, in that airplane cabin, those things seemed to matter more than anything else. Karen stood in the galley, phone still pressed to her ear, talking to 911, explaining why a teenager studying anatomy was a danger to everyone on board. Explaining why his presence in first class was suspicious. Explaining why she, a white woman with expensive jewelry and designer clothes, felt unsafe sitting next to a black child with a backpack and a dream. And in that moment, Karen Matthews had no idea, absolutely no idea, that she was making the biggest mistake of her life. She had no idea what she was about to discover about Marcus Williams. She had no idea why he was really in that seat. She had no idea whose attention she was about to attract, but she was about to find out. If you can't believe what you're hearing, if you're feeling the same anger and frustration that everyone on that plane felt, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Because what happens next, what Karen discovers in just a few minutes, will leave you speechless. Hit that subscribe button right now. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Flight attendants, please prepare for arrival. We'll be landing in Baltimore in approximately 30 minutes. 30 minutes. That's all the time Karen had left before her entire world came crashing down. 30 minutes before she learned the truth. 30 minutes before regret became the only emotion she'd be able to feel. The plane flew on through the clear blue sky, carrying Marcus Williams toward his grandmother, carrying Karen Matthews toward consequences she couldn't even imagine, and carrying a story that would change everyone on board. Because sometimes the people we dismiss are exactly the people we should have paid attention to. And Karen Matthews was about to learn that lesson in the most public, most humiliating, most devastating way possible. The overhead speaker crackled to life, and the captain's voice filled the cabin. Deep, authoritative, the kind of voice that commanded attention. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We'll be landing in Baltimore in approximately 20 minutes. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Standard announcement. Nothing unusual. Passengers shifted in their seats, preparing for landing. Karen was still on her phone in the galley, still talking to 911, still building her case against Marcus Williams. But then the captain said something that made everyone pause. "I'd also like to take a moment to recognize a very special passenger on board today." Karen's head snapped up. She ended her call abruptly. This was it. This was the moment. The captain was going to acknowledge her concerns. He was going to thank her for her vigilance. Vindication was coming. She smoothed her hair and straightened her designer blazer, preparing to be recognized as the hero who'd kept everyone safe. But the captain's next words shattered her world. Seat 2A is occupied by Marcus Williams, a 16-year-old honor student who just received a full scholarship to Johns Hopkins University. The cabin erupted in applause. Passengers clapped, some whistled. The businessman across the aisle was grinning. The young couple beamed. Mr. Davis nodded with satisfaction, like he'd known all along. And Marcus? Marcus sat frozen, his eyes wide with shock, not understanding what was happening. Karen's face drained of color, white as the clouds outside the window. But the captain wasn't finished, not even close. "But that's not why Marcus is in first class today." The cabin went quiet. Everyone leaning forward, listening. "Marcus, your grandmother wanted to surprise you. She's been saving for 3 years to upgrade your ticket for your first flight ever." Marcus's hand flew to his mouth. Tears began streaming down his face. 3 years. His grandmother had been planning this for 3 years. The captain continued, his voice warm with emotion. "She called us yesterday and explained that your mother passed away 8 years ago, and you've been caring for her while maintaining a 4.0 GPA. She said you've never asked for anything, so she wanted to give you this gift." The cabin was silent now, except for the sound of people sniffling, wiping their eyes. Even the businessman had tears running down his face. Marcus sobbed openly, his shoulders shaking. All this time, he'd thought the upgrade was a mistake. A computer error. Something that would be taken away. He'd never imagined, never in his wildest dreams, that his grandmother had done this for him. His grandmother, who'd raised him alone, who'd worked double shifts, who'd sacrificed everything to give him a future, who'd somehow, impossibly, saved enough money to give him this one moment of luxury. Karen stood in the galley, frozen. Her face had gone from pale to gray, her hands trembled, the phone slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. She'd called the police. On this boy. This brilliant, kind, deserving boy whose grandmother had saved for 3 years to give him one beautiful memory. What had she done? Jessica, the flight attendant, approached Marcus's seat holding a small envelope. Her own eyes were wet with tears. "Marcus, this was supposed to wait until landing, but I think you should have it now." Marcus took the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a card, handmade, with his grandmother's careful handwriting. He opened it, and his voice broke as he read aloud. "My sweet Marcus, you are flying high in every way. First class today, but you've always been first class to me. Love, Grandma." He couldn't continue, couldn't speak, just pressed the card to his chest and cried. But there was more inside the envelope. A receipt. An itemized receipt showing every payment his grandmother had made to the airline. $40 in January 3 years ago. $50 in March, $30 in June, month after month after month. Small amounts, grocery money, probably. Bill money. Money she should have spent on herself. All of it going toward this one ticket upgrade. The receipt showed the final total, $1,200. Paid over 36 months by Dorothy Williams, retired cafeteria worker. The exact amount Karen had complained about paying for her seat. The difference? Karen had probably charged it to a credit card without thinking twice. Dorothy Williams had bled for it, sacrificed for it, gone without things she needed so her grandson could have this one thing he didn't even know he was getting. Mr. Davis turned around in his seat again, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of lived experience, of a man who understood exactly what Dorothy Williams had done and why. "Your grandmother is a wise woman, son. She knew you deserved to see how the other half lives, even if just for a few hours. She wanted you to know your worth." Marcus nodded, unable to form words. Richard finally found his voice. He turned to Karen, and for the first time that entire flight, there was no patience in his tone, no excuses, just disgust. "Do you see what you've done, Karen? Do you see? Karen's mouth opened and closed. Her voice came out defensive, but it shook with the first hints of realization. How was I supposed to know? He didn't say anything. He didn't. The businessman cut her off, his voice sharp. You could have talked to him, like a human being. You could have shown basic respect. The young woman across the aisle added, her voice quiet but cutting. Or you could have just minded your own business. Karen tried to respond, tried to defend herself, but Richard held up his hand. Just stop. Please, Karen, just stop talking. He turned away from her, staring out the window, and the distance between them, even though they were sitting right next to each other, was suddenly enormous. The plane began its descent, that feeling in your stomach when the aircraft drops altitude, when gravity shifts. Everyone on that plane felt it. But Karen felt it more than anyone. The sinking, the falling, the realization of consequences rushing up to meet her. Jessica received a message through her earpiece. Her face, which had been soft with emotion moments before, turned serious, professional. She walked to the galley where Karen stood and delivered the news that would change everything. Ma'am, the captain has informed authorities of the situation. Police will be meeting the aircraft, but not for the reason you expected. Karen's eyes went wide. What? No, I'm the one who called them. They're here for him. She pointed at Marcus, but her finger wavered. Her conviction was crumbling. Jessica's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. Yes, ma'am, and filing a false police report is a crime. Additionally, this airline takes discrimination very seriously. You'll need to speak with both law enforcement and our customer service supervisor upon landing. The words hit Karen like physical blows. False report. Crime. Discrimination. Richard covered his face with his hands, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He'd probably seen this coming from the moment Karen first complained. He'd warned her, told her to stop, and she hadn't listened. Other passengers began murmuring, the cabin filled with whispers, judgments being passed, justice being served in real time. Karen's voice rose, panicked now, all pretense of righteousness gone. This is insane. I was just being cautious. I was protecting people. Mr. Davis unbuckled one more time, stood up, turned around, and when he spoke, his voice was calm, measured, but carried the authority of someone who'd spent a lifetime dealing with people exactly like Karen Matthews. No, ma'am. You weren't being cautious. You were being prejudiced. There's a difference. He let that sit for a moment, watching her face crumble. Caution is locking your car door. Caution is being aware of your surroundings. Prejudice is seeing a black child studying in first class and deciding he doesn't belong there. Prejudice is calling 911 because someone's skin color makes you uncomfortable. That's not caution. That's racism. The word hung in the air. Racism. Karen flinched like she'd been slapped. I'm not racist, she protested, her voice desperate. I have black friends. Ma'am, Mr. Davis said, his voice gentle now, almost pitying. The fact that you need to say that tells me everything I need to know. He turned back to his seat. Conversation over. Marcus sat quietly through all of this, still holding his grandmother's card, still processing everything that had happened. The upgrade. The announcement. The revelation. The vindication. But there was no triumph in his eyes, no satisfaction. Just sadness. Because this wasn't new to him. This was just the first time it had happened on an airplane. The first time it had been this public. The first time there had been consequences for the person who'd judged him. But it wouldn't be the last time someone would look at him and see a threat instead of a gifted student. It wouldn't be the last time someone would question his right to occupy space. It wouldn't be the last time he'd have to prove his humanity to strangers who'd already decided he didn't measure up. And that knowledge, that resignation, was the saddest part of all. The plane dropped lower. The city of Baltimore came into view through the windows. Buildings, and highways and the harbor where the light hit the water just right. Somewhere down there, Dorothy Williams was waiting at the gate with balloons and a sign and a heart full of love for her grandson. Waiting to see his face when he got off his first flight. Waiting to celebrate his achievement. Waiting to wrap him in her arms and tell him how proud she was. She had no idea what her gift had cost him. No idea that her act of love had been weaponized against him. No idea that police would be waiting at the gate, but she was about to find out. The landing gear deployed with a mechanical thunk. The wing flaps extended, the plane lined up with the runway. Karen slumped back into her seat, all the fight gone out of her. She looked small suddenly, defeated. Her expensive clothes and jewelry suddenly seemed costume-like, props in a performance that had gone horribly, catastrophically wrong. Richard didn't look at her, didn't comfort her. Just stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. Jessica made one final announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats after we land. We'll have a brief delay while authorities board the aircraft." More murmurs, more whispers. Everyone knew what was happening. Everyone knew who the authorities were there for. The wheels touched down, a smooth landing. The plane decelerated, the reverse thrusters roaring. The city rushed past the windows, slowing to a crawl. Marcus wiped his face, carefully folded his grandmother's card, and placed it in his backpack next to his acceptance letter to Johns Hopkins. 2 pieces of paper. 2 futures. One earned through sacrifice and brilliance. One given through love and 3 years of saved grocery money. Karen Matthews sat in seat 2B, her world shrinking with every second, wondering how a simple flight had turned into the worst day of her life. But it was about to get worse, because the plane was pulling up to the gate, because police were waiting, because the truth, the full, devastating, public truth, was about to be revealed. And Karen Matthews, who'd thought she was protecting people, who'd thought she knew better, who'd thought she had the right to judge a child based on the color of his skin and the price of his shoes, was about to learn what real consequences felt like. The plane came to a complete stop. The seatbelt sign dinged off. But nobody moved. Everyone waited, because they all wanted to see what happened next. The wheels kissed the tarmac with a gentle thud, and the plane began its taxi toward the gate. Inside the cabin, the tension was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. Everyone sat in silence, waiting, watching. The overhead speaker crackled one final time. "Please remain seated. Law enforcement will be boarding the aircraft." Those words, cold, official, final, hit Karen Matthews like a bucket of ice water. This was real. This was actually happening. She turned to Richard, her voice rising with panic. "Richard, do something. Call our lawyer. Tell them this is a mistake." Richard didn't even look at her, just shook his head slowly, his voice flat and emotionless. "I told you not to call. I told you to leave it alone. But you never listen, Karen. You never listen." The plane came to a complete stop at the gate. The jet bridge connected with a mechanical thunk. And then the forward door opened. 2 police officers stepped onto the aircraft, flanked by an airline supervisor in a crisp uniform. The officers were professional, experienced. The kind who'd seen everything and weren't easily impressed or intimidated. One was older, maybe in his 50s, with gray at his temples. The other was younger, a woman with sharp eyes that took in the entire scene in seconds. They walked down the aisle toward first class, and every head turned to watch them pass. The older officer stopped at row 2. His eyes moved from Karen to Marcus and back again, and when he spoke, his voice was calm, but carried absolute authority. "Ma'am, are you the passenger who called 911? Karen straightened in her seat, trying desperately to regain the composure and righteousness she'd had an hour ago, trying to remember why she'd been so certain she was right. Yes, I am. I reported suspicious behavior. I was protecting everyone on this flight." The female officer pulled out a small notebook. "Can you describe this suspicious behavior for us, ma'am?" And that's when Karen's story fell apart. Because now, with 2 police officers staring at her, with the entire cabin listening, with Marcus sitting right there holding his grandmother's card and his Johns Hopkins acceptance letter, she had to put into words exactly what had made her so suspicious. He just seemed out of place. Wrong shoes, wrong clothes, he didn't fit, something wasn't right. The words came out weak, pathetic. Even she could hear how they sounded. The older officer's eyebrows rose slightly. "Wrong shoes? You called 911 because of someone's shoes?" "No, I mean yes, but it was more than that. He was in first class and he clearly couldn't afford to be there. And so, no actual crime?" The female officer interrupted, her voice professional but with an edge. "No weapon? No threat? No illegal activity?" Karen's mouth opened and closed. He made me uncomfortable." The airline supervisor stepped forward, a tablet in her hands. "Officers, We have multiple witnesses who heard Mrs. Matthews make discriminatory statements throughout the flight. She questioned this young man's right to be in first class, made comments about his appearance, took unauthorized photographs of him, and repeatedly harassed him despite being asked to stop by flight crew. The businessman across the aisle raised his hand slightly. I recorded some of it. The comments, the harassment, all of it. He held up his phone and the officers nodded. The female officer turned to Marcus and her entire demeanor softened. Young man, are you all right? Did this passenger threaten you in any way? Marcus looked up, his eyes still red from crying over his grandmother's card. His voice was quiet, tired, carrying the weight of every microaggression, every assumption, every moment of that flight. Yes, ma'am, I'm all right. I just want to see my grandmother. The older officer's face gentled even more. Something paternal crossed his expression. You'll be off in just a minute, son. We just need to sort this out first. He turned back to Karen and the warmth disappeared from his voice. Ma'am, we need you to come with us to answer some questions about filing a false police report. Karen's face went white. False? How is it false? I felt threatened. I felt unsafe. The female officer's voice was sharp now, all professional courtesy gone. By a 16-year-old honor student reading a medical textbook? By a teenager on his first flight who never said a word to you? By a child whose grandmother saved for 3 years to give him this gift? Every word landed like a hammer blow. The airline supervisor stepped forward again, her voice clinical and final. Mrs. Matthews, you're also being banned from this airline, pending a full investigation into your conduct. You'll receive formal notification within 48 hours. Banned, the word echoed in the cabin. Richard stood up. Just stood up without a word, grabbed his carry-on bag from the overhead compartment and stepped into the aisle. Karen looked up at him, desperation flooding her face. Richard, where are you going? You can't leave me here. Richard finally looked at her, and what she saw in his eyes was worse than anger. It was exhaustion, resignation, the look of a man who'd reached his absolute limit. This is your fault, Karen, all of it. Your paranoia, your prejudice, your need to always be right, to always be the victim. His voice was quiet, but everyone heard him. I told you to stop. I begged you to stop. But you called the police on a child, on a brilliant child who's done nothing but exist in a space you decided he didn't belong. He hitched his bag higher on his shoulder. I'll get my own ride home. Don't call me. I need time to think about whether I can keep doing this. Keep making excuses for you. Keep pretending your behavior is normal. Karen stood, reaching for him. Richard, please. Don't do this. Not here. He stepped back, avoiding her touch. Watch me. I'm tired, Karen. I'm tired of your behavior. I'm tired of apologizing for you. I'm just tired. And he walked away, down the aisle, off the plane, gone. Karen stood there, frozen, watching her husband leave. The cabin was silent, except for her rapid breathing. She turned to the officers, her voice breaking now, all the fight drained out of her. Please, I made a mistake. I overreacted. I'm sorry. Can't you just let me go? Mr. Davis, the elderly gentleman from seat 1A, gathered his belongings and stood to exit. As he passed Karen, he paused, looked at her with those kind, knowing eyes that had seen this story play out 1,000 times before. No, ma'am. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. Choices have consequences. Perhaps next time you'll choose differently. He nodded to Marcus one final time, then walked off the plane with quiet dignity. The young couple came next, moving down the aisle hand in hand. The woman paused at row 2, looking at Karen with something like pity. I hope you learn from this. I really do. They left. One by one, the first-class passengers filed off. Some glanced at Karen with disgust, some with pity, some didn't look at all. But everyone knew what had happened. Everyone had witnessed it. And Karen Matthews, with her designer clothes and her expensive jewelry and her absolute certainty that she'd been right, stood there alone. No husband, no dignity, no defense. Just 2 police officers waiting patiently to escort her off the plane for questioning. The businessman stopped as he passed Marcus. Johns Hopkins is lucky to have you, young man. Don't let people like her dim your light. Marcus nodded, grateful. Thank you, sir. Finally, it was just Karen, the officers, the airline supervisor, and Marcus. Jessica, the flight attendant who'd weathered Karen's complaints all flight with professional grace, approached Marcus one last time. And when she spoke, Her voice was warm and genuine. "You're free to go, Marcus. Your grandmother is waiting at the gate, and for what it's worth, you handled yourself with more grace than most adults would have. You should be proud." Marcus stood, slinging his worn backpack over his shoulder. He looked at Karen one final time. Not with anger, not with triumph, just with sadness. Because he knew this wouldn't change her. Not really. She'd tell herself she was the victim. That she'd been unfairly targeted. That political correctness had gone too far. She'd find a way to make herself the hero of this story. And the next time she saw a young black person in a space she thought they didn't belong, she'd probably do it all over again. That was the saddest part. Not the 911 call. Not the humiliation. But the certainty that nothing would really change. Marcus walked past her without a word and made his way to the exit. Behind him, Karen finally broke. Tears streamed down her face as the full weight of what she'd done and what it had cost her crashed over her like a wave. The older officer's voice was gentler now, but still firm. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us. You're not under arrest at this time, but we do need to ask you some questions." Karen nodded numbly, gathering her designer purse with shaking hands. Will I be charged?" she whispered. The female officer's face was unreadable. "That depends on what our investigation finds. Filing a false police report is a crime. Harassment can be a crime. We'll have to see." The airline supervisor pulled out her tablet. "You'll also be receiving a bill for the emergency response costs. When you called 911 from the aircraft, you triggered multiple emergency protocols. That's expensive, Mrs. Matthews." Karen's face crumbled further. Everything was falling apart, her marriage, her reputation, her finances, all of it crumbling because she'd looked at a teenager and decided he didn't belong. The officers escorted her off the plane. One on each side. Not in handcuffs, not yet, but everyone in the terminal saw them. Saw her being led away by police. Saw her crying. Saw her shame. And Marcus Williams walked through the jet bridge toward his grandmother, carrying his backpack, his medical textbook, his acceptance letter, and his grandmother's card. The card that proved someone believed in him. Someone loved him. Someone thought he deserved first class. Not because of the price of his shoes or the color of his skin, but because of the content of his character. Behind him, Karen Matthews faced the consequences of her choices. Ahead of him, his grandmother waited with balloons and a sign and a love so fierce it had bled money for 3 years, just to give him one perfect moment. And Marcus Williams, brilliant and kind and deserving of every good thing, walked toward his future. A future that was bright, that was earned, that was his. No matter what anyone else thought he deserved. Marcus emerged from the jet bridge into the terminal. And there she was. Dorothy Williams. 68 years old. Silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun, wearing her Sunday best, a lavender dress she'd probably owned for 20 years but kept immaculate. In her hands, balloons. Bright, cheerful balloons bobbing in the recycled airport air, and a sign handmade with markers and poster board that read, "Dr. Marcus Williams, Future." Her face, oh her face lit up like the sun when she saw her grandson. Pure joy. Pure love. The kind of love that saves money for 3 years without telling anyone. The kind of love that sacrifices silently and celebrates loudly. "Baby," she called out, her voice cracking with emotion. Marcus dropped his backpack and ran. Ran like the child he still was in so many ways. Ran straight into his grandmother's arms, and they collided in an embrace so tight, so full of everything unspoken, that people in the terminal stopped to watch. They cried together. Marcus sobbing into her shoulder, Dorothy stroking his head, whispering, "I'm here, baby. Grandma's here. You're safe now. You're home." Behind them, being escorted by the 2 officers, Karen Matthews saw it all. She saw the reunion, saw the balloons and the homemade sign, saw the threadbare but clean dress Dorothy wore, saw the way this elderly woman held her grandson like he was the most precious thing in the universe, because to her, he was. And something inside Karen broke even further. Because she understood finally what she'd tried to destroy. She'd called the police on a child whose grandmother had bled for 3 years to give him one moment of joy. She'd weaponized her privilege and her fear against the most vulnerable, the most deserving, the most innocent. Karen stopped walking. The officers stopped too, patient but firm. And Dorothy Dorothy Williams, who had every right to ignore this woman, to curse her, to demand justice, turned around, looked at Karen, and made a choice. She let go of Marcus and walked toward Karen Matthews. The officers tensed, ready to intervene if needed. Marcus reached out as if to stop her, but Dorothy held up one hand. "It's all right, baby, just 1 minute." She walked until she was standing directly in front of Karen. Two women, two different lives, two different choices that had led to this moment. Karen's voice came out broken, barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry, I was wrong, so completely wrong." Tears streamed down her face, her expensive makeup running, her designer clothes suddenly looking like a costume she'd worn to play a part she didn't understand. Dorothy studied her for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was measured. Not cruel, but not soft either. The voice of someone who'd lived through enough to know that apologies mean nothing without understanding. "Do you know why you were wrong?" Karen nodded frantically. "Because I judged him without knowing anything about him. Without giving him a chance. Without—" "No," Dorothy interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "You were wrong because you judged him at all." She let that sink in, let it land. "That's my grandson. He's 16 years old. He lost his mama when he was 8. He's been taking care of me ever since, helping with groceries, making sure I take my medicine, reading to me when my eyes get tired. He's been through more pain than you can imagine, and he still chooses kindness every single day." Dorothy's voice didn't rise. Didn't need to. Every word carried weight. "He volunteers at a free clinic every weekend. He tutors younger kids in the neighborhood. He's never asked me for anything. Not new clothes, not expensive shoes, not trips or toys or anything teenagers usually want. All he's ever asked for is books. Medical books. Because he wants to save lives. Because he doesn't want another child to lose their mother the way he lost his." Karen was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. "I don't expect forgiveness," she managed to say through her tears. "I don't deserve it." Dorothy nodded slowly. "Good, you're right, you don't deserve it, and I'm not giving it." The words were hard, but Dorothy's face showed something complicated. Not quite pity, not quite anger, something in between. "But I hope you remember this moment, Mrs. Matthews. I hope you remember my grandson's face. I hope you remember what your fear and your prejudice almost cost a child who's done nothing but try to build a better life." Dorothy took a step closer, and her voice dropped lower, more intimate, more devastating. "And I wholly hope that next time you see someone you think doesn't belong, you choose differently. Because next time, there might not be a happy ending. Next time, your call to the police might end with someone dead. Do you understand me? The reality of that, the statistical reality that Black people die from police encounters started by calls, just like Karen's, hit like a freight train." Karen could barely breathe. "I understand. I'm so sorry. I'll do better. But Dorothy was done. She'd said what needed saying. She turned, walked back to Marcus and took his hand. Her hand, weathered and wrinkled from years of hard work. His hand, young and trembling and holding his entire future. Marcus looked back at Karen one last time, and there was no anger in his eyes, no hatred, just sadness. A deep, bone-weary sadness that a 16-year-old should never have to carry. The sadness of knowing this would happen again. Maybe not on a plane. Maybe not this exact situation. But somewhere, somehow, someone would look at him and see a threat instead of a person. Dorothy and Marcus walked away, balloons trailing behind them. The grandmother who'd given everything. The grandson who deserved everything. Behind them, the officer's voice was professional, but not unkind. "Let's go, ma'am." Karen let herself be led away, her world in ruins, watching the boy she tried to destroy walk into a future so bright it put her to shame. 3 months passed. In those 3 months, the story went viral. The businessman's recording, the witness statements, the airline's response. It spread across social media like wildfire. Millions of views, millions of comments, millions of people weighing in on what had happened at 30,000 feet. The airline responded publicly, issued a formal apology, not just to Marcus but to every passenger who'd ever been profiled, discriminated against, or made to feel less than. They donated $50,000 to Marcus's scholarship fund. $50,000 that would ensure he never had to worry about books or supplies or any of the small expenses that add up and crush dreams. Marcus Williams, now 17, sat in a Johns Hopkins University laboratory, wearing a sweatshirt with the university's logo. His sweatshirt now. His university now. His future now. He bent over a microscope, studying cardiac tissue samples, his notebook filled with observations in that same careful handwriting he'd used on the plane. Around him, other pre-med students worked, but Marcus was in his element. This was where he belonged. This was what his mother's death and his grandmother's sacrifice had been building toward. Karen Matthews stood in a community center in her neighborhood, facing a small group of people for a mandatory bias training session. Part of her plea deal, she'd been charged with filing a false police report and harassment. The charges had been reduced in exchange for community service, and this, hours and hours of training designed to confront the prejudices she'd carried her whole life without examining. She looked different. Smaller somehow. Less polished. No designer clothes. No expensive jewelry. Richard had filed for divorce 6 weeks after the incident. The divorce was finalized now. He'd moved out, moved on, made it clear he couldn't be married to someone whose values he couldn't respect. Karen spoke to the group, her voice hesitant. I thought I was being careful, I thought I was being smart. But I was just being cruel. I saw a child and decided he was dangerous because of how he looked, because of where I thought he came from. It was a beginning. Just a beginning. Not redemption. Not yet, maybe never, but a beginning nonetheless. Marcus thrived, because that's what Marcus did. He studied, he excelled, he helped his classmates, he called his grandmother every single night, without fail, to tell her about his day. One evening, months into his first semester, Marcus sat in his dorm room, a small single with posters of the human circulatory system and a framed photo of his mother on the desk. He pulled out his phone and video called his grandmother. Dorothy's face appeared on the screen, and she was in her kitchen. The same kitchen where she'd made Marcus breakfast every morning for 8 years, where she'd helped him with homework, where she'd held him when he cried for his mother. "Baby, how was your day?" Marcus's face broke into the biggest smile, the kind of smile that showed he was exactly where he was supposed to be. "Grandma, guess what? I got the highest score in anatomy class, highest in the entire section. Professor said my understanding of cardiac pathology was exceptional." Dorothy's face lit up with pride so fierce it seemed to glow through the phone screen. Her voice rang out, strong and joyful. "That's my first-class grandson." They both laughed. Really laughed. The kind of laughter that comes from joy and relief and the sweet victory of proving that love wins. That sacrifice matters. That a grandmother's 3 years of saved grocery money had bought something more valuable than a plane ticket. It had bought belief. Proof that Marcus deserved good things. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Grandma," Marcus said, his voice getting thick with emotion. "No, baby," Dorothy said, shaking her head. "You did this. You earned every bit of it. I just bought you a seat on a plane. You're the one flying." The screen faded to black, and words appeared in white text. "Assumptions can cost us everything. Kindness costs nothing." The message lingered. Simple, true, devastating in its simplicity. Because Karen Matthews' assumptions had cost her her marriage, her reputation, and any claim to moral high ground. Her fear had cost her everything. But Dorothy's kindness, her 3 years of sacrifice, her unwavering belief in her grandson, her grace even in the face of prejudice, had cost her money she didn't have. And it had bought something priceless. It had bought Marcus one moment of feeling worthy. One flight where he felt first class. One memory he'd carry forever of his grandmother's love made manifest in an upgraded seat and a handmade sign and balloons at the gate. And from that one moment, an entire future had bloomed. Marcus Williams would graduate from Johns Hopkins, would become a pediatric cardiologist, would save lives. Would make sure other children didn't lose their mothers the way he'd lost his. All because his grandmother believed in him. All because he refused to let hatred dim his light. All because he chose, every single day, to be better than the people who underestimated him. The final image appeared on screen. Marcus and Dorothy, together at his graduation, still months away but inevitable. Both wearing their Sunday best, both grinning like they'd won the lottery. Because they had. Not in money, but in something that mattered more. They had each other. They had love. They had proof that goodness exists even in a world that tries to crush it. And that was worth more than first class. That was worth everything. Now it's your turn. What would you have done if you were a passenger on that plane? Would you have spoken up for Marcus? Would you have stayed silent? Would you have recorded what was happening? Drop your honest answer in the comments below. No judgment, just conversation. Because we all like to think we'd be heroes, but real life is complicated. And if this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that we all have the power to choose kindness over fear, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because there are more stories like this that need to be told. Stories of courage, justice, and the quiet heroes who change the world one act of grace at a time. Thank you for watching. And remember, the next time you see someone and make an assumption about who they are or what they deserve, think of Marcus Williams. Think of Dorothy Williams, and choose kindness. Choose differently.